Hey brewers and beer lovers, it's Jake with superbrewers.com. Sorry I missed out on last week, but I was at the Midwest Craft Brewers Conference. I presented on the magic of community, talking about the community that's grown up around our homebrew club and some of the local breweries. But today I'm actually gonna use this episode to actually play a different discussion that was at the Midwest Craft Brewers Conference. And I feel like this is a discussion that's very important, particularly for commercial brewers, which is the way the discussion was formed or presented, is basically who talks to commercial breweries that have significant flaws. Whose job is that? Is that the job of the beer lover? Is that the job of fellow brewers? Is that the job of some sort of guild or other organization to call the brewery on the quality of their product? And the thing that I find interesting about it is this is also a discussion that I think needs to be had in homebrew clubs and among homebrewers as well. Is do you want to know if the beer you're making has flaws in it? And don't just say, oh yeah, I always want to improve my beer. I really want to know what you think, because it's really easy to taste a beer that you know has significant flaws and then just kind of debate, well, does this brewer really want my honest feedback, or do they just want encouragement to keep brewing? And I think that that is something that a lot of homebrew clubs and homebrewers in general need to think about. Do you want honest feedback on your beer, or if you like your beer, is that good enough and you can just ignore whatever feedback comes from other people? But the speaker is Michael Agnew. He's the founder of aperfectpint.com. He's also a member of the Minnesota Craft Beer Guild, and he wrote a book, and in the talk he talks about the fact that shortly after it was published, it was already out of date, because it was a guide to Midwest craft breweries shortly before there was a lot more craft breweries to deal with. So, but check out his stuff. I'll have links in the show notes, the comment or the description below. And I really want to hear from you guys, in whether you're watching this on YouTube or watching it on my website on superbrewers.com, or if you downloaded the podcast. Please go to the page for this episode and leave a comment. Just go to superbrewers.com/MCBC discussion, all one word, no hyphens, and just leave a comment, because I want to know whether who do you think is responsible for giving feedback to brewers, be they commercial breweries or home brewers? Whose job is it? But hope you're having a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.
And we have now Michael Agnew with A Perfect Pint.
Thanks. I hate podiums, so I was really glad to see there was a handheld mic up here so I could wander around. So I'm going to talk for a little while, and then my big hope is that this will be more of a discussion than a talk. I'm depending on you to make this thing actually go. So after I sort of set some context and create some questions and points for dialogue, I'm kind of going to turn it over to you and ask you questions and hopefully get you talking to each other in this room about what I'm about to talk about. So to better introduce myself, my name is Michael Agnew. I'm from Minneapolis, and I own a company called The Perfect Pint. I do beer education kinds of programs. So I do private and corporate beer tasting events, beer dinners. I teach classes in a lot of different venues. The University of Minnesota Continuing Ed, for instance, I get to teach about beer at the U. I also write about beer in a lot of different venues. I have a monthly column in the Star Tribune on beer. I write for The Growler, which is our local Minnesota beer magazine. I've written for most of the national beer mags at this point. And I have a couple of books out there, one of which is A Perfect Pint's Beer Guide to the Heartland, which is what I'm going to start talking about. So this was supposed to be a comprehensive compendium of all the breweries in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. It came out in May last year, and it is already hopelessly out of date. Thank you very much, all of you. Woohoo! No, that's a good thing, actually. Now, I started researching for that book in 2010. I had this great idea. I saw that things were about to happen. There were exciting things happening in this region. More was about to happen, and I kind of wanted the rest of the world to know what was going on here, because at that point we were still sort of flyover country as far as beer goes. But I knew there was exciting stuff happening and about to happen. So I got this idea to write this book. And my research consisted of 2.5 years of traveling around to, I think I actually visited about 210 breweries in those states. I did phone interviews with the remaining breweries that I didn't get to for a total of 236. So I spent a lot of time on the road, talking to brewers, tasting beers. I know I visited a lot of the breweries of folks that are out there. Some of you are brand new, so I didn't get to your breweries. I'm sorry, you came out too late. But I had a great time, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time for those 2.5 years. When you're doing intense travel like that, a few things really become clear. You really sort of get an understanding. One of those, when you're doing, so I was going out for a week and a half at a time and doing 3 to 4 breweries a day, which is pretty intense beer travel. So one of the first things I learned was pacing. Pacing is important. There was one particular 4-brewery day. I was in Des Moines. My last stop of the day was Rock Bottom in Des Moines. And they had 15 beers on tap. And of course, I tried to taste all of the beers at all the breweries I went to. Whatever was available, I tasted it. So Rock Bottom in Des Moines had 15 beers on tap, and they had just finished a strong beer festival. So probably 10 of those 15 beers were 8% alcohol or higher. And the bartender obviously didn't know what he was doing. He started me at the really strong end and worked down. So I reread my notes from that visit a little bit later, and the writing gets sloppier and sloppier and sloppier as I go. And at one point in my notes, I actually wrote this: I will get through this. So fortunately, my hotel was a mile from the brewery. I didn't know that when I booked it. Another thing that became clear in all that travel was urination management. That's really important with beer travel. Take care of that any opportunity you get. You'll be glad you did. Something that really struck me, and this is sort of getting to the heart of what this is all about, something that really struck me that maybe should have been clear going into it, but really wasn't when I went into the tour, was that beer works on a bell curve. Like so many things, beer works on a bell curve. The vast majority of breweries out there are making good beer. It's good. It's not beer that you're going to jump up and down and scream and holler and say, woo, this is the best beer I've ever had in my life, but it's good, it's solid. You're going to sit at the bar and gladly drink 2 or 3 pints. A handful of breweries at the one end are making really great beer. Beer that will make you jump up and down. And then a handful on the other end should not be making beer. And when you do that kind of intense travel, when you're going a week and a half at a time and you're going to 3-4 breweries a day, the good, the bad, and the ugly really start to stand out. It becomes absolutely clear as you move from one to the other what's good and what's not, and what's great, and what makes it good, bad, or great. It's surprisingly clear when you're doing that kind of travel, because you're able to just compare one to the other. Those 2 things, I think, surprised me the most, that bell curve and how clear that difference came. So this gets me to what I'm here to talk about today, and that is quality management in the industry. So what does this idea of the bell curve and this stark difference in good, bad, and ugly mean for now? So since I started working on that book in 2010, we've had this explosion of breweries. I estimate now that, so like I said, there are 236 breweries in that book. I estimate now that there are maybe twice that in those 4 states. So we've had this huge expansion of the industry in those 5 years. With that, all pieces of that bell curve have increased. The bell curve hasn't changed. You still have the vast majority making good beer, a handful making great beer, and a handful that shouldn't be making beer. But with that increase, all of those numbers have increased. You have a lot of people coming into the industry now who, with various backgrounds. You have people coming in with a lot of experience. You have people coming in with almost no experience. So what does this mean for us? I'm just going to lay it out there. And this might not make me popular. There's a lot of not great beer being made right now. There's a lot of not great beer being made right now. I'm not the only one saying this. It is a topic of discussion in the industry. So I know at CBC Craft Brewers Conference a couple of years ago, it was the topic of one of the keynote speakers. All about, y'all better take care of your quality. Almost all the brewers that I talk to, it's a big concern for them. You know, they start raising the specter of the boom and bust of the 1990s, when people got in who didn't know what they were doing and made bad beer. People tasted it and said, oh, this is craft beer, well, I don't need that. And things crashed. So my own experience going to the Great American Beer Festival, I go every year, and my strategy at the GABF is to go to breweries that I have never heard of. That's what I do when I work the floor. I go to breweries I've never heard of. And that's always, for until a couple of years ago, that's always really worked out for me. But the last couple of years, that's gotten a lot spottier. There's a bigger hit or miss factor there of whether the beer that I taste at a particular brewery is going to be good or not particularly good. And I talked to some brewers that I know who judge beer at the GABF every year and have done for several years. Talking to one on the floor at GABF last year who said to me, the number of bad beers entering this contest this year was staggering. So even in a big contest like that, this increase in lower quality and beer that doesn't quite meet the standards that we, I think all, would hope that our beer is meeting, is increasing. So the question is, what do we do about this? Because I think it's important. I really think it's important. You know, and there are different thoughts about this. For the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild, I'm on the Allied Trades advisory panel. And we, in our last meeting, had a big discussion about this. And the idea was raised that, well, the market will take care of this. So those breweries that aren't making great beer, people will stop going. And they'll go out of business. The market will deal with it. That's not really what I see happening. I see something different happening on the ground. So we've got you know, everybody wants to support local. We've got a growing consumer base, people coming into the beer industry. They're really into beer. They don't necessarily have a lot of knowledge about beer to back that up, to know what's good or bad, to know when they're spotting off flavors. When I say bad beer, I'm not talking about beer that I don't like, or beer that's like falling to the lower end of that middle bell curve. I'm talking about beer that has significant quantifiable process flaws, off flavors. So they don't necessarily, this new consumer base doesn't necessarily know what those off flavors are. So they're tasting beer and there it is. And they want to support local. So they're going to their local brewery. There's one that I visited, a friend of mine lives nearby. The beers at this brewery were significantly flawed, but as my friend said, yeah, they're not great, but I can walk there. So that's where he went. So people are going to these breweries, wanting to support local, maybe not knowing what they're drinking. And I believe that we are teaching people to drink bad beer. We are telling people this beer is what craft beer is. And we're teaching this whole new generation of beer drinkers to drink bad beer, to appreciate bad beer, and believe that's what beer should be. So what do? So I'm going to relate one more story from my travels around the country, around the region, visiting breweries. So I was at the start of, it was like a 7-day trip, and I was headed down through one state, and invariably when I would visit a brewery on one of these tours, the brewers would always ask me, so, where are you going next? And I would tell them, I'd give them a list of breweries, and there was one day, traveling through one of those 4 states, when I would list off the breweries, and I would hit one brewery in particular, and every single brewer I talked to before I went to that brewery said, oh, then you'll know what diacetyl tastes like. Or, oh, they've got problems. They've got issues. Every single brewery knew this. Every other brewer that I talked to prior to visiting them knew this. So I visited that brewery, and sure enough, a lot of diacetyl. The next day, one of the breweries I visited, the brewer there happened at that time to be the president of that state's local brewers guild. So, just off the cuff, this wasn't part of my official interview or anything, it was just curiosity on my part. I asked him, so if you have a brewery in your membership that everybody knows is making flawed beers, what do you do about that? And he paused for a minute, puzzled, and then said, we don't do anything, really. That, to me, was a stunningly unsatisfactory answer. I had not asked that question with any real intent in mind. I was just curious. But when that was the answer that came back, I thought, really? You don't do anything? Isn't the guild somehow, like, you know, a representative of the industry in the state? Doesn't the guild want to lift up what's happening in the state with beer? Maybe not. I don't know. But it led me to the question, what responsibility do local guilds have? What responsibility do states' guilds have in trying to maintain a level of quality within the beer industry in that state? So I've asked that question in a number of places. There are a few things that I can see going on, and I'm going to put out some ideas of stuff that I know is happening out there, that I've seen happening out there, and then we're going to open it up for discussion and hopefully get some ideas from you. So one of the things that I know is happening, at least in Minnesota this is happening, is bigger brewers offering their labs to smaller brewers to analyze their beers. And in that way, you know, helping smaller breweries know actually what's going on in their beer. I've seen, what have I seen? Guild-sponsored education events. So, I know that the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild just a couple of weeks ago, in conjunction with the All Pints North Festival up in Duluth, had a day-long tech conference for brewers. So they're sponsoring education events for other brewers to sort of, you know, get some more knowledgeable brewers happening. I've seen mentorships. So partnering more experienced brewers with less experienced brewers. I also see guilds putting more attention on consumer education, which I think is important. Maybe I'm biased because that's what I do, but an emphasis on consumer education is important. Because like I said, we've got a consumer base now that doesn't necessarily understand what they're drinking. They know they love it. They know it's a great thing. They're very excited, but they don't necessarily understand it. So I think a more knowledgeable consumer is a better consumer. And I'm not talking about the beer nerd who comes into your brewery and thinks they know everything. I'm talking about people who actually have some understanding of beer styles and beer flavors and where those come from. Of course, there are issues related to all of this. And I'm going to put those out on the table for discussion as well. I mean, yes, we are in the brotherhood of beer, or the sisterhood of beer, as the case may be. But you're all competitors as well. So it's like that idea of friendly competition. Another thing that I learned on my tours is that if brewers ask you for your opinion, they actually want it. And if they don't ask you for your opinion, they don't want it. So how open are brewers going to be to competitors telling them that their beer is problems? That's a question, I think, that needs to be answered. How open will brewers be to constructive criticism from others in their industry? You know? What's the potential for constructive criticism to become not so constructive? To become destructive criticism? I think when you start getting into brewers advising other brewers about their beer, you potentially create some weird power hierarchies. So you start to say, well, so-and-so is a better brewer than so-and-so, who's a better brewer than so-and-so. And it creates this weird kind of unevenness that can create waves within the industry. And then, of course, time. How many of you as brewers actually have time to mentor somebody else? No hands went up. So all of these things are issues. So what I want to do now is just sort of turn this over as a discussion to address some of these issues. So I'm going to put the big question out there is, what responsibility do local guilds have for maintaining quality within the state's industry? So I'll ask that, and then maybe you don't think the guild has a responsibility. Let's talk about that too. And then if you do, what are some of the ways that is being taken care of, and what are some of the complications that arise from dealing with this issue within a guild? Or maybe we leave the guild out of it even. I'm all for that too. Maybe it's not the guild, maybe it's individual brewers taking responsibility. So, Philip, you have your hand up.
I am Phil from the land of 10,000 beers. Thank you, if you don't mind.
I'm going to roam around the audience now.
So I'm Phil Platt. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild, a position I've held since the middle of January when we had 68 member brewers, and now we have 84. You know, I do like the saying that our industry is 99.99% asshole free. I think that's true, and so far I haven't met one, and I'm thankful for that. So we have been wrestling with this question of quality on a number of different issues, levels, and different ways to solve it. One idea was the lab, which I think is really good, and I agreed with 99.9% of what you said. The bigger brewers sharing labs that's really a service. When I was out in Washington, D.C., I met with a number of other guild leaders, and I broached this topic with them, and I said, should we have a blind tasting? And one fellow who's been at this as a guild leader for 10 years said, no, don't do that. It's going to cause trouble, it's going to cause bad feelings, and it won't move the needle. And I said, well, should we have a quality brewer of the year? And he said, no, that's not really going to help either. I said, well, what do you think we should do? And his advice, which is very good, and this is how I, as a guild leader, handle the question of quality, is if somebody brings up the question, this brewery, their beer needs work, then my advice is go to that person as an individual, as a person to person, individual to individual, not with any titles, not with any levels of authority, but just on a real heart-to-heart, but based on quality level. Have a conversation and see what happens. And don't be pushy, but just say, I'm concerned because I think you want to do well, and I think you can do better. And so that's why I'm talking, and I'm not going to share this conversation with anyone. It's totally private, and I'd like to help if I can. And so I think it's the responsibility of every single person who can evaluate a beer and say it's got problems, if it's appropriate, if they're in your neighborhood or your state or your city, to go to them and just say, let's have a beer sometime and have that conversation heart to heart, but also brother to brother, sister to sister, because we're not going to all succeed if some of us really bomb. And that concludes my presentation.
Well, let me ask you, Phil, one question following up on that. So I'm going to say, just because of your position, you're going as the executive director of the guild. What if you were another brewer going to another brewer?
Same conversation.
So it wouldn't change anything in your mind?
No. No, well, the brewer would be able to be a lot more learned than I am. It's way above my pay grade to talk about some of the more sophisticated analyses of quality.
All right. What do the rest of you think? What's going on? What's being done in your state, or what do you think, who has responsibility?
Hi, Michael. I'm Lucy. I write cookbooks about beer, but I also have been writing about beer on premise for trade magazines, specializing in the hospitality industry for almost 30 years. And a lot can happen to a really beautiful beer on the way to a customer's glass. A lot can happen that the brewer can't control. And I feel that there are standards of service that are being promoted through different education programs and consulting that you do and others in the audience do. That helps in training people's palates. But it also, the distribution and retail element, bringing up the pressures that operators may feel to finish a keg on draft. Those are real economic pressures, and I think that matrix is something that needs to be explored, because I don't know that every brewery has the ability to serve on premise a really large number of people. And this kind of goes to the nut of the thing, which is I always tell people, try a beer more than once. You may not like it at a particular bar, but if you go to the brewery and try it there, you might have a different experience.
And that, to me, is where that consumer education piece comes in. If you have educated consumers who can recognize dirty draft lines, for instance, or a problem like that, coming from Minnesota, the state that supposedly has the second worst draft lines in the country, an educated consumer can really help with that, and I think that's one of the things that the guilds can kind of jump on, is finding avenues to build a more educated consumer base. What else? Let me just put that question out there. Does the guild have a responsibility for this? What do you think?
I'm Louise from Union House Brewing. One thing I noticed back to this conversation is that we have had incidences where we buy beer from a local brewery in a store and have two different experiences even from the same store. And it's like one thing is consumer education, another thing is your retailers. I've been into grocery stores where beer that should be in the fridge is on top on a shelf. And then when you sell it, it's like, oh, your favorite brewery, your favorite beer is bad. And so you kind of wonder, is this also, you know, the brewery, the distributor, the guilds or something, as far as more education outside of breweries?
Okay, so like retailer education. All right. What else? What do you guys think? It's an uncomfortable conversation right now. That's what I do. I raise uncomfortable conversations. What do you think, really? Like I said, this is an issue that's being discussed nationally. It's not just me standing here bringing this up.
I don't need a microphone. The one thing that I think, my wife told me about it a few years back, that education, that's the best advertising you can ever do.
In what way? How is that the best advertising?
People will know what they're wanting to buy. People will be looking for stuff. They're just more educated about it. I've watched quite a few of my friends that were strictly Miller Lite drinkers start to discover the taste of beer.
All right. Through education.
Yes.
All right. What else? What kinds of things are you seeing in your communities or your states that people are trying to do to deal with issues of quality?
Michael, could you talk about the Better Beer Society?
Sure, why not? Seeing as I'm now a part of it. So in the Twin Cities, one of the things that's happening, and this is not guild related, although we're working with the guild on various things, is the Better Beer Society, which is a pretty comprehensive program of mostly for retail. So it involves a draft cleaning service. It involves brand advocacy, where they send representatives into stores to do tastings, like in-store tastings. And we have a full sort of service staff training program and certification that covers all aspects of beer, from styles and flavors to keeping and service. And the retailers, bars and stores can go through this training, send their staff through this training. So one, they have a more knowledgeable staff to help educate consumers. And two, they know what they're pouring and they know how to treat it so that it's poured at its best. And if they go through all of this, then they get the Better Beer Society certification with a sticker to put on their door. So that's one of the things that's happening in the Twin Cities to help deal with this.
Well, to get rhetorical then, do you feel any responsibility with the Better Beer Society as an outside party to have any enforcement on beer quality within Minnesota state, it's your state?
From the retail side, yes. Directly approaching brewers? Well, I will say for me personally, I'm not going to speak for Better Beer Society on that. I would have to let Rob do that. Rob Shellman is the director of the Better Beer Society. I would have to let Rob take care of that. For myself, I can say this. I am a beer writer. I write, like I said, in a number of venues. In the past, my policy has always been, if I don't like something, don't write about it. But in the last year and a half, I've been getting a lot of pressure from consumers and even other brewers to say, why aren't you writing about it? You know, people should know. If this is problematic, people should know. And so I've gradually started moving towards addressing some of the things that I see as problematic. So for myself personally, yes, I am starting to see that I have a responsibility in this. But again, I'm not going to speak for Rob. What else? What do you think? As brewers, what is your responsibility for sort of maintaining quality across the industry? Not just for your own brewery, but if you see another brewery that you know has problems, how would you address that? Would you address that? Or would you not address that? Do you have any responsibility to address that? I know you're all thinking. What do you think, seriously? I mean, this is a question that for me is really of burning importance.
Well, along the lines of with the better.
Tell us who you are.
I'm sorry, Elliot Ginsberg with Hop Law. We represent brewers and distillers, and we're out of Minneapolis. Along the lines of the Better Beer Society, is there any possibility of a group like that or the Better Beer Society actually going into breweries, and obviously the staff is going to be somewhat knowledgeable, but maybe teaching them about things to look for in flavor, so that, you know, if something comes out of a keg, they can taste it and decide whether there's something off or not, or something like that.
So for somebody to go in and do like off-flavor tasting courses for brewers,
Yeah.
I don't know, what do you think? That is something that Better Beer Society could do. It's not something we're doing right at this moment, but it certainly is something we could do. Is that something that brewers would welcome? I'm not saying that I'm not trying to sell you or anything, but as brewers, is that something that would be welcome? What do you think? Wow, this is a quiet bunch of brewers.
Because they're sober.
That's right, there's no beer here. What's up?
I can give you an example of a brew pub in Minneapolis that did an off-flavor class for all of their staff, all of the front of house people, and it was, I've heard from, I think, 3 of those people who would not normally be exposed to that kind of education. So it was really good, and I learned things that I never knew before that I'd heard about, but now I know what they are, and I'm a better employee for all that.
All right, does anybody do anything like that? If you're running a tap room, does anybody do anything like that for your staff? Here, do you do off-flavor stuff? Tell us what you're doing, Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Culhane, She Brewing in St. Paul. I haven't done it yet, but I am going to send my assistant brewer to Jera's judging class. And I've also taken her out to tongue-in-cheek across the street, because they always have very interesting things on tap. Some of them are crap. And I can say, okay, Allie, this is what I tasted in this beer. Do you taste that? And things that, because I want her to be able to assess each keg before it goes on tap in case I'm not there. Because right now, I put a red dot on it. If it's okay, that means it's past my palate. And if it doesn't, it gets dumped. So far, I've only had to dump a single keg, but we're new.
What else? What is happening in your communities? What is the responsibility that you all have for maintaining quality in brewers? Are you even concerned about this? Is this an issue that you are even thinking about? Is it on your radar at all?
Again, I don't need that. I think I'd rather have somebody tell me I'm doing something wrong than rather than look online and rate my beer and find out what some of the ratings have been for some of the brewers. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but there's some real blistering comments for certain beers that are made out in our state.
So would it be okay then for you, for other brewers to approach you and say?
I would hope so.
So you would want them, you would hope that they would come to you.
Absolutely.
All right. Anybody else feel that way? How welcome would it be for another brewer to come to you and say, you know, there's some problems here? Would you welcome that, or would that be unwelcome? You'd welcome it? All right, just show of hands. Let's force you to do something. Show of hands. Who in here would welcome other brewers coming to you? All right. Awesome. What other thoughts do you have about this topic? I'm really interested to know what's going on in these regions.
My name is James Altwise. I'm with Gorse Valley Hops, so not being a brewer, but a product ingredient supplier. Certainly for some of the smaller breweries and the breweries that we get into, the conversations that we have about raw ingredient quality is an afterthought, right? Barley is barley, malt is malt, hops are hops, and that's not necessarily the case. Certainly with a lot of small brewers who perhaps can't get the hops that they want and are forced to buy, if they want that variety, hops that are far out of date. And yet they can't get quality data like hop storage index numbers and oxidations and things like that from the purveyors, just because they either don't have the ability, the purveyor doesn't, or they don't want to share that information because they don't know. So we've been sticklers in demanding quality and traceability through the ingredient track in the brewing process. And that we believe and try to teach our brewer customers how to inquire about these things and what are the important questions to ask. Because what is that, saying you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, right? We know a lot of brewers that we even go to face, that if we're not the low-cost provider, there's the door, right? And I think there's a problem with that. I'm not going to tell anybody how to run their business, but I don't know that it's all, tap lines and tasting off flavors. It goes more to this idea of, well, what am I trying to produce? Is it a quality product, or am I just trying to produce?
So a holistic approach. You had your hand up. I'll come back to you.
My name's Jake. I am the president of the local homebrew club, so if your beers have problems, obviously I know what I'm doing. So, but I looking at this from an outsider perspective, I'm not a commercial brewer. I couldn't tell you guys how you do the amazing things you do. I can't extrapolate from my 10-gallon system to your however many barrels you're making in a batch. I had a couple different thoughts. How can we, as outsiders of the industry, approach a brewery that we know has flavors? Because I've talked to people who've tried that. Knowing home brewers, they may not have been the most tactful approach. I try to be as tactful as possible, but there are brewers who just don't care or don't take us seriously because we're not commercial brewers or other things. How can outsiders talk to breweries in such a way that it can be a constructive discussion rather than I hate your beer? Because I've had breweries that I used to love and their beer just went downhill because after the first couple people talked to them, everybody gave up. And so as a home brewer, I'm also familiar with getting my beers judged, and there's that pang of pain that somebody would dare criticize what I poured my heart and soul into. But once I get past that, then it's like, okay, well, I recognize there's these problems and I can try to fix it, but I don't know how we can constructively approach that discussion. And then the other thought I had is going back to the guilds and like the Better Beer Society and stuff. I think they're great and they're useful. And unfortunately, there's also a conflict of interest because you're facing, if you have a dues-paying member, which is how your organization survives, how can, there's either going to be a power play of like Phil approaching and somebody as the executive director of the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild, and so there's going to be could be some interpretation of somebody shaking their finger at somebody else, but at the same time, fear on your part that you're going to alienate current or potential members by saying, you know what, your beer just isn't up to snuff. And like even with the Better Beer Society, sure, they can go through the process and be awesome up front, but then they have to maintain that quality. And I mean, that's a completely different discussion. Once you get in quality, or once you get quality in place, how do you ensure that it stays that way? Sorry, I just brought more questions than answers, but
that's good. So I want to put your first question out to the room. So we've talked about brewers approaching brewers. with problematic beer. What about consumers approaching brewers? And answering his question, how can consumers engage you guys in that conversation in a way that is meaningful and not I don't know, not just coming off as an asshole critique?
Well, this might be sort of a question for Phil. I don't know if other guilds have done anything like set up sort of an opt-in, anonymous suggestion box sort of thing where consumers who may be uncomfortable having a direct face-to-face conversation criticizing a brewer may be able to put something in anonymously that the guild can give members access to. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of stupid comments, but then you may come across an occasional reasonable comment with constructive criticism, and that may be a way the guilds can sort of get involved and help out.
How willing is everybody to take advice or take criticism from consumers?
I think they should be very open to it. I know I am when I'm working on a recipe, and I've worked on a recipe and I share it with somebody, and if they don't like it, I need to hear why. And that's why I work with recipe testers, and I'm assuming that most breweries do their own in-house QA and their own in-house testing, and you need to know if anything fell through the cracks and why.
Anyone else? Oh, all the way in the back. I love these things where I get to run around a big room.
My name's Ken Matthews with Habitat Glassware, and I want to go back to the gentleman who doesn't need a microphone, and I'm going to maybe ask a question and answer it. In Rate a Beer, are those comments put in there by consumers?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so to me, I see a perfect opportunity as a brewer that might see that comment in there from a consumer to, and I don't know who would necessarily do it, if it would be a brewer, if it would be the Brewers Guild, or whatever organizations you might have out there, say, I saw your comment in the Rate a Beer, and it wasn't very positive, wondering if you might want to sit down and talk about it, and maybe we can help. You know, something along those lines. To me, it's just a door opener, because you have a consumer saying, you know, your beer is not, doesn't meet the standard of other breweries. So I think that in and of itself is a great opportunity to address that particular brewer and their beer. And it's certainly got to be a lot easier when you are looking at a third party that criticizes your beer as opposed to brewers going up talking to brewers. And possibly a lot of hearsay involved with that. So.
How much stock do you guys put in, like, Rate Beer and Beer Advocate?
I just got a thing to say. I say bad beer is needed. You need the bad beer. Without bad beer, how would you know it was good? How would you know it was great? Without the bad everything and the good, everything would be the same. You can implement the laws like they do in Germany. You're only allowed to use certain ingredients and brew certain ways and do certain things, or it's like other countries do. But you need the good with the bad and the ugly. You need it all together. It's a complete package. If I drink this beer, you know, I like it. And a lot of things, it has to do with the medium. Like there's certain beers that are only good on tap. There's certain beers you drink in bottles, you know, in cans and such and so forth and so on. But you need the bad. You don't just get rid of it. You need it.
All right. What about that? You need the bad. What do you think? I can go with that. Even though I want to uplift everything.
I'm going to disagree with that because as a commercial entity as well and business owner, that could easily become reflective poorly upon our business. So if somebody in the neighboring brewery is brewing a poorly crafted beer and a consumer has that and equates it to craft beer, good beer, and then they come to us and say, oh, well, I like X brewery's beer better, even though it's clearly a flawed beer. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the consumer. It doesn't help
But that's only your
other
perception of
breweries that are
flawed.
producing good beer.
That's your perception of flawed. You know, there's a lot of people have different palates and different tastes and whatnot. And
But this is like truly flawed beer versus like just different.
Yeah. You need it.
It seems like there's two
stories going on here. One is the beer flawed on the production side, where it was made wrong, or somebody did something wrong. I brewed at home and I produced stuff that I thought was okay, and it was probably terrible to most people. But there's also the part of if it's served at a bar, or at the tap room, or whatever else, are the beer lines clean, or were they cleaned properly, where the was the glassware washed properly, were the bottles washed properly? There's a lot of different things, and it seems like you could just come up with a list of those issues and then promote that within the brewing community of here's what the issue is, here's what it tastes like, here's what it, and you promote it that way.
What do you guys think?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Peter from Eau Claire. Not a professional brewer, so I'm glad. You spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars on your education, your equipment, and then you've hired a 20-something cute to be an ambassador to your product. So sometimes as a consumer of beer, I'll go to a tap room at maybe even your brewery, and here's this young lady or gentleman who doesn't know a thing about beer, pouring and even handing out disinformation. So as a consumer, one of the things that really bothers me.
All right. Any other thoughts on this?
Dick Covier from Boulder Junction. I own and operate a craft beer pub in northern Wisconsin here. And taking this all in here, I think the question that goes in my mind is where do we want to go with this? I get a lot of good beers from the coast, and they're really reputable. We've got some very good breweries in the Midwest, and to me, I'm asking, why not? Why can't we be as good as California, Oregon, some of these other states? And I think it comes down to the question you're asking, the quality enforcement on this right here. If we're going to go someplace and be known for our breweries, I think we need some quality standards.
All right, so you just sort of segued into my closing there. Thank you. So that is my question. Where are we going to go with this? I know this is an uncomfortable conversation. And like I said, I pointed out a bunch of ways in which it is uncomfortable. But I think it's an important conversation. Just as somebody who deals sort of as a liaison, if you will, between brewers and consumers, I think it's a terribly important conversation. And I raise it not just to make everybody uncomfortable, although I do have a reputation for that. I raise it because this is an industry that I really believe in. This is an industry that I'm really passionate about. And this is a region whose industry I am really interested in and really passionate about. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent 2.5 years writing a damn book that's already out of date. I think these are really important questions that we need to ask to ourselves, and really important issues that we need to consider. Where are we going to go with this? How are we going to take everybody and lift them up? What is our responsibility? Whether it's the responsibility of the guilds in each state, or whether it's the responsibility of individual brewers, or somebody else's responsibility. These are questions we need to be asking ourselves, and they're questions we need to be searching for answers to and figuring out what are we going to do to maintain overall quality across the industry. And that's all I got. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that talk from Michael Agnew. Make sure you check out his site at aperfectpint.net. In the meantime, please visit superbrewers.com/MCBC2015, and I'm working with the other presenters that were at the conference to be able to release their videos for you guys to view if you weren't able to make it to the conference. And on there right now, I don't have any other videos posted yet, but I'm working on it. But there is a sign-up form so that you can get on an email list to get notified when those videos become available. And I hope you sign up. Let me know what you think of the videos. Leave your comments below. Cheers.